So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case, and I just want to say right now that this video is going to be a long one. And yeah, I really just want to say thank you for the response on my last true crime video, the kind of shorter one on Jimmy Mizzen, because I really do want to spread any case, no matter the amount of information that I have on it. Like this case, I have a lot of information on it because there's just a lot of information out in the public about this case. However, there's some cases that just don't have a right lot of public information on them. And yeah, I just want to say thank you that you guys think the same way as me, that you would also like the smaller videos in and amongst the longer ones, because every victim deserves to have their story told equally. So yeah, that out of the way, I just want to give my usual disclaimer before I get into this case that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This is all just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Today's case is the solved case of Rhys Jones, also known as Little Boy Blue. So Rhys Milford Jones was an 11-year-old boy born on September the 27th, 1995. He lived in Liverpool in England with his mum and dad, Melanie and Stephen, and his older brother, Owen Jones, who was, I believe, 17 years old at the time, but I couldn't find an exact age. I don't suppose it matters too much, but he lived with his mum and dad and older brother. They lived on an estate called Croxteth Park Estate in Croxteth, and this had something like 3,000 privately owned houses on it, and so there was a huge kind of sense of community. Everyone knew each other. And
in the middle of the estate is the Fir Tree pub. And then very close by is the only block of shops on that estate, with a medical centre, a school and a church nearby.
Rhys had lived on this estate all his life, and his family had lived there for 6 years before he was even born, and so they really felt safe and secure there.
I'd never had any worries about letting the boys go out and play. We've never had any trouble up there.
He was a very friendly, popular boy with tons of friends. He was always happy, always smiling, always positive.
I know a lot of his friends he'd be the first person he'd knock for to go out and do anything, because they knew if Rhys was out, all the others would come out.
Above all else, Rhys was absolutely football mad. That was like the biggest part of his personality. He was obsessed with football. He would play it himself, and if he wasn't playing it, he was watching it on TV.
Every new kit he'd want it, he'd just want to go out and buy it, and he'd wear it till it fell off him.
He supported Everton Football Club and he was so dedicated to them. He watched every single match. He even went to a few of the matches, and bear in mind he was only 11 years old, so he didn't go to every single match, but he went to a few. He had their kits, he had their bedding, he had decorations. He was Everton mad. Rhys was a mischievous little boy. He was very outgoing, very cheeky, very social. He was always up to something.
Rhys was he was a cheeky little lad. He was always smiling, always laughing.
He was always playing tricks, and he was dead mischievous. He'd always make mud balls and start throwing them at the kids, and then all the other kids would join in, and I'd just be tearing my hair out like shouting at him.
Like I said, he played football a lot, so he just played on the street with his friends, like as normal kids do, but he also played as part of a football club. He played for the Fir Tree Football Club, which was his like local football club in his area. He'd already done his first season with the club. He was with them for about 12 months and he was just about to enter his second season with them.
He was a good footballer. You could see it from an early age. He could kick the ball further than other kids of his age, and you could see that there was something special about him.
On Wednesday the 22nd of August 2007, Rhys's football club, the Fir Tree Football Club, decided that they were going to hold an extra training session before their match at the weekend. There was also an England versus Germany football match on that night, and so Rhys was really excited to, one, go to football and play football, and two, to come home and watch the football on the TV. He had a snack before training, said goodbye to his family, and walked out of the door and walked to his football session.
Rhys always used to take himself to training. As you come out of our house, it'd be a 5-7 minute walk on one straight road straight up to the football pitches.
So Rhys arrived at the football training field at about 6 o'clock, and when he got there he realised that he'd forgotten his money. I think every football session, or every so many football sessions, was £5, and on this particular session the boys had to bring their £5 with them, and Rhys had forgotten his.
And he went, "Oh, I forgot my money," and you could see him start to panic a little bit. And Before I could even say anything off, he'd gone. He'd run home.
So Rhys ran straight back home, burst through the front door and waited patiently for his mother Mel to give him the £5. And since running back home had already taken some time out of his football session, Mel decided to put him in the car and just drive him the short distance to the field again.
And he got out the car and he just kissed me on the cheek and said, "See you, Mum, I'll be home to watch England." Okay. That was the last thing he said.
So Rhys got to his football session and they had a normal session, and as you can imagine, Rhys was absolutely in his element. Apparently it was a really good training session. The boys all worked really hard, they all enjoyed themselves.
We decided to have a penalty competition at the end, just as a bit of fun. When it was my turn, I took the last penalty and Rhys was on the other team and he said, "I'll go in goal, I want to go in goal," so he went in goal for my penalty. When I did score, all the kids jumping on me and we were laughing and joking, and it was real good session.
It was the last training session before this match that they were all excited for, like I said, and they were all also excited to go home and watch the England match.
He said to her, and I said, "Where are you going? How are you getting home?" So he said, "It's all right, I'll walk." I asked Rhys to get in the car 2-3 times, and I even said to him, "No, come on, get in the car, I'll drop you off, it's no problem. Come on." And Rhys was adamant he was well.
So Rhys set off walking on the same route home that he took home from football every single time for the last year. He must have done it over 100 times before. It was around 7 PM in August, so it was still bright outside, like full brightness. It wasn't even dropping dark yet. There were tons of people around. It was a really warm day, so people were just out and about.
I jumped in my car and I drove probably 50 yards, and Sean was in the passenger seat and he screamed out Rhys's name. And I looked back, I've seen Rhys hit the floor, and I knew immediately he was hurt.
Rhys was walking through the car park of the Fir Tree pub, which was just in front of the football fields where he'd just been, and then he fell over, and luckily he was seen by his football coach who was in the car.
The first thing that entered my head was he slipped. So I slammed the brakes on in the car and I jumped out, but by the time I'd done that, Sean had opened the door and jumped out.
Another woman who had been sat outside the pub had also run over to Rhys and found him lying in a pool of his own blood already after he'd just fallen down, and so she started to administer some kind of first aid.
He was lying in like a pool, literally a pool of blood. The girl was shouting to me, "He's been shot." Sean was hysterical. I just froze, I was numb, I couldn't have done anything at all. The first thing I done was get my phone out and I phoned the ambulance and the police.
There's a young lad been shot.
Okay, how old is he, please?
He's 11. He's on my football team. Oh my God, blood everywhere.
Is he breathing?
No, he's not. Someone just said they think he's dead.
So the ambulance was on its way, but now Rhys's parents had to be contacted somehow. However, Steve the coach didn't have Rhys's parents' number, and so he rang the other Fir Tree football coach that also taught the boys, who was called Tony Edge.
I could hear the panic in his voice, and he said, "Tony, I don't know what to do. Rhys has been shot."
I started to shout a little bit. Just get round there and get his mum and get her here now, immediately.
I remember just thinking, what am I going to say? What do you say to his mum or dad when they answer the door?
So Tony ran straight to Rhys's house. He didn't call them on the phone, he ran straight to his house, where Rhys's family were all inside just so unsuspecting. They were all just watching TV, having a normal evening. And the saddest thing is that they were just expecting Rhys to walk through the door any minute, and so maybe when they heard the knocking on the door, they might have thought it was Rhys.
There was a knock at the door, and I just opened the door and Tony was just standing there.
I said, "Steve's just rang me and he said Rhys has been shot, but I don't know how bad it is, that's all I know."
He just went, "You just need to come with me now," and I didn't even have time to think, grabbed my keys and my phone, and I just got in the car.
The journey from Rhys's house to the car park where he was shot was less than a minute in the car, and Mel and Tony were just sat in the car in complete silence the whole way. And obviously you can only imagine what's going through Mel's head at this moment. Like, you can't have normal conversations. What are they supposed to talk about? Like, there must be so much going through her head at this moment that what do you say? What do you do? No one knows how they would react in that situation. Until now, they had no idea that there was guns on the estate, full stop. And now to find out that her innocent 11-year-old son had just been shot, like, I can't even imagine.
It seemed like there was hundreds of people all around. I couldn't see anything at first. I got out the car and I just heard someone shout, "Here's his mum." And then as I heard that voice, all the people that were together just sort of stood apart, and Rhys was just on the floor. And I just ran over. I couldn't really even see where he was hurt. I could just see the pool. He was lying in a pool of blood. I just put my hand under his head and I said, "Come on, Rhys, you're going to be okay, come on. You're going to be okay, I'm here now. It's going to be fine." And people were screaming and, "Where's the ambulance?" But I was just, "Come on, Rhys, just look at me, you'll be alright."
The ambulance eventually got there and paramedics immediately started working on him there in the car park and trying to find the source of the bleeding, trying to stop the bleeding. The paramedics actually said to Rhys's mother Melanie that he was still alive, but he was just in a very critical condition.
When I got a call off Mel, and it was a very, very short call just saying that, "Steve, you need to come home, Rhys has been shot." And the first thing that went through my mind was that some kids had an air rifle or an air pistol and they, let off a pellet or something and it struck him and lodged him or whatever it was. I didn't for one instant think that it was a proper firearm that he'd been shot with.
The paramedic said to me he was still alive, but I don't know, he was trying to resuscitate and he was doing his heart, but I knew looking at him, his eyes were wide open, there was blood pouring from his mouth, he was just lying there in a pool of blood. I knew he'd gone.
Stephen, Rhys's dad, arrived at the pub car park just as Rhys was being taken away in the ambulance, and all Stephen saw was this huge pool of blood on the floor, and he knew that this was really serious. Obviously, until now, Stephen, Rhys's father, had just thought that he'd been hit with like a pellet gun or a target practice gun. He had no idea that his son had been hit with a real firearm, a real bullet. Rhys's mother Melanie went with Rhys in the ambulance to the hospital with Stephen, his father, following behind in the car.
They're all working on him and there's a whole team of people and you're thinking, it's going to be okay, they're going to... And they allowed me and Steve to go in and we were rubbing his legs and took his boots off, rubbing his feet and they were telling us to talk to him, and while they were all working on him, and I'm thinking, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, because they know what they're doing and they can see him, but they tried so hard, didn't they?
And then it got to the final thing, but if this doesn't work, there's nothing else we can do, and his heart just wouldn't beat on its own with it, and he'd lost a tremendous amount of blood, and his little body just couldn't take any more. It was just, as much as I was praying.
The doctors tried everything they could possibly do, but Rhys just wasn't gaining consciousness. And so at 8:46 p.m. on the 22nd of August 2007, Rhys Milford Jones was pronounced dead.
You couldn't touch him. He wasn't yours anymore. He was a crime scene.
And so Rhys's family all went home. They had to leave his body there in the hospital. They couldn't stay with him until someone came to take it away to a morgue or anything. They just had to leave his body there in the hospital and go home, and they were just all in complete shock. They just went and sat in his bedroom and just sat and talked about him in complete disbelief. Within hours of Rhys's murder, the news spread like mad, and it was on every single news channel, news article that same night. The next morning, Rhys's face, his name, the story of his murder was the first headline on every single newspaper, every single news channel. He was everywhere. So Merseyside police quickly began searching around the kind of estate, that kind of local area, to see if they could find any evidence, maybe like a ditched murder weapon, any bullet casings, anything of that nature, but they found absolutely nothing, not even the bullet that hit Rhys. Rhys's case was immediately classed as a Category 8 case, meaning that this took priority over any other case in the whole of Merseyside. And this also meant that most police resources in Merseyside were being put onto this case, most of their money, most of their officers. Police quickly established that this murder was probably gang related because witnesses reported seeing a bunch of teenage boys in the car park. No one actually saw the shooting take place, no one saw one person shoot Rhys. However, there were a bunch of teenage boys, and in this area, there were some teenage boys in gangs. Police had been aware for a few years now that there were gangs of teenage boys happening in Liverpool. However, things were done about it, but they can't completely dismantle a gang.
You've got a situation in Liverpool 11 where in effect two close-knit geographical locations, which is Croxteth and Norris Green, are separated in effect by one road. And over the years there has been a number of incidents involving almost like conflict between these two groups, which had escalated and had started to actually use guns. People
in the area had been aware of these gangs for years, but no one ever really thought that anyone innocent would get caught up in this. Yeah, gangs go after each other all the time, but if you're not part of a gang, then you're most likely safe. And besides, they never really came over near where Rhys lived. Rhys, like I said, lived in the Croxteth Park estate, and the Croxteth gang originated from the old Croxteth estate, which was a council estate over a mile away from where Rhys lived. And obviously, with it being over a mile away from the Croxteth Park estate where Rhys lived, no one ever expected it to spill over onto their estate because no one had ever witnessed any of these gang arguments or fights until now. It had just never come over to them, so they never expected it to.
I just couldn't comprehend it.
I just wanted to understand. I just wanted to know what had gone on, why someone could shoot an 11-year-old boy. Because I knew that Rhys didn't hang around with those type of people. All his mates were all just good lads.
Obviously, with it being most likely gang related, police knew it was going to be so hard to find any kind of witnesses because obviously if you're in a gang members don't want to betray their friends. And if a random member of the public that wasn't caught up in any gangs had seen anything, witnessed anything, they most likely wouldn't come forward because they'd be too scared to. Like I said, gang members always have each other's back, and if you tell the police that one of these gang members did something, who knows what his mates might do. So in an attempt to kind of personalise the case and give it some emotion so that someone might feel that and come forward, Rhys's parents Mel and Steve decided to give a public appeal just the following morning after Rhys's murder.
Someone knows who's done it, and I know people must be frightened, but they've got to think that they can't leave this killer out there. It could be their son, could be their brother next time. Because it'll happen again. If he's not caught, it'll happen again.
And if their parents had any thought about our pain and what we've lost, they'd turn in their son. Or their sister, or their auntie, or someone must know who it is, or they must suspect who it is.
Quickly, rumours began to circulate around the community about one boy in particular. I'm not going to tell you this boy's name just yet, and the police had absolutely no evidence at all that it was this boy. These were literally just rumours. People in the community are going to talk.
We knew there was a name being bantered about. We told all our friends and family not to tell us. Until that person was actually charged with Rhys's murder, I didn't want to know who he was.
How many people got in touch within the first 24 hours?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Mm-hmm. There were lots of names coming in, but there was one name in particular that came in.
You are continuously hearing one name?
Yes.
So witnesses that were at the pub that day were questioned, and they said that they saw boys on bikes, teenage boys on bikes, and that they heard a total of 3 gunshots. And they thought that the first shot was fired from one end of the car park to the other end at 2 boys on bikes. So the intended target wasn't believed to have been Rhys. The 2 boys on bikes began to ride away and get away from the person shooting at them, when the shooter fired another bullet, and this time it hit Rhys, who was innocently walking across the car park. He was initially believed to have been shot in the neck, but later during his autopsy it was found that he was shot in the top of the back, just above his shoulder blade, and the exit wound was actually in his neck, so the bullet went in his back and out of his neck. The shooter then fired a 3rd time, again at the intended target, those 2 boys on bikes that we don't know who they are, and missed again. And at this point, the shooter obviously realised that they'd hit Rhys because he'd fallen over, and so they sped away on their own bike. The shooter was caught on several different CCTV cameras riding away from the crime scene. However, none of these crime scenes showed the shooter's face. They just showed like a person on a bike wearing all black. And the fact that this person was wearing all black, hoodie, hood up, full trackies, everything, in the middle of summer, it was the 22nd of August, and it's quite hot in England in August, not like boiling hot, but too warm to be wearing that. And so this suggested that the shooter intentionally tried to hide their identity so that they wouldn't be caught, because maybe this was an intended murder. The CCTV footage did, however, show the route that the shooter took away from the crime scene, and so this kind of made it easier for police to figure out where he was going after he shot Rhys.
When the gunman left the scene, we knew that he'd driven through the Croxteth Park estate on his bike. He'd crossed over Fir Tree Drive North and was narrowly missed by passing traffic, and across into Damwood, which is a wooded area that separates Croxteth Park and the old Croxteth estate.
Obviously, onto housing estates, there's no kind of security cameras on housing estates unless they're on individual houses. Like, you don't just have them in the street, and so they didn't know exactly which house he went to, but they knew a lot from just the general estate that he went to. They could really pin down like which gang he might have belonged to, who he might have been associating with, because obviously they did think that this was gang related, and there was only one gang that lived on that estate. The CCTV footage also gave a decent picture of the bike. It wasn't a perfect picture of the bike, but they managed to get the colour of it and the general kind of dimensions, so they knew pretty much what sort of bike they were looking for. The actual crime scene, however, the car park of the Fir Tree pub, offered very little in the way of forensic details.
The biggest challenge from the outset was probably a lack of forensic opportunities at the scene. We didn't recover any bullets. There were obviously no fingerprints of any note. The CCTV footage we had wasn't of the best quality, so that in itself sets a challenge.
Obviously, as the days were going on and on, people were getting more and more worried. There was someone on the loose that had shot and killed a child. And if someone can do that to a child, they can do it to anyone, really. And obviously, because the shooter aimed at opposite gang members, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that they were going to try and shoot these gang members again, because obviously they'd failed the first time and they wanted to do it for a reason. Or those gang members and their gang might know that the other gang is trying to target them and they might retaliate, shooting someone in the other gang. So it was like a really dangerous time to not be finding someone. What I'm trying to say is the chances of another shooting were worryingly high. So like I said, through the community there was this rumour about one particular teenage boy. And these rumours just weren't dying down. And normally, if a rumour is going on for so long, you're going to find things to debunk it and you're going to be like, oh, well, it can't be him. But this rumour just wasn't dying down. People still were talking about this boy. Police still had no specific evidence, but there was also no evidence to say that it wasn't him. And this particular teenage boy was 16-year-old Sean Mercer. Sean was kind of well known to police. He didn't have a criminal record, but he had been stopped and searched by police over 80 times in his life, and he was only 16 years old. And so that shows that he was doing some kind of suspicious sort of activity, or they believed that he was part of a gang, because that is a lot of times to be stopped and searched at just 16 years old. I'm 19 and I have never once been stopped and searched by police. So that's really saying something about who he was. Sean Mercer also had what was known as an ASBO at the time. They no longer give these out, but an ASBO is an antisocial behaviour order. And it's basically like a court order given to a certain individual that's shown antisocial behaviour in a certain public situation, and it kind of stops them from doing certain things, going certain places, just for the safety of others, for the sake of keeping the peace. Sean Mercer was also born into a gang, so he had older family members in this gang known as the Croxteth Crew, or the Crocky Crew.
He had a fanatical patriotism towards Croxteth. He was on the cusp of going from the youth wing of the Croxteth Crew into the older gang. Now, that's significant because once you get into the older gang, you can start making money. You can start grafting with them, which was the term they use for drug dealing and going out to do robberies.
And there were two main gangs in this area, the Croxteth Crew and the Norris Green Strand Gang, just known as the Strand Gang, but they came from Norris Green Estates. Just like the Croxteth Crew came from the old Croxteth Estate, so they both came from their own estates and they both had their own gangs. The Croxteth Crew and the Strand Gang had been rivals for something near 3 years now, since 2004. And this wasn't actually the first murder to come of it. Rhys's murder was actually the day before the first anniversary of the murder of Liam Smith, who was a leading member of the Strand Gang, so it was almost exactly a year since the first murder.
Liam Smigger Smith was just 19, the self-styled leader of the Strand Gang, who liked to star in his own YouTube videos.
So Liam Smith was in the Strand Gang, like I said, and he went to prison to see a friend who was in prison, also from the Strand Gang. And while he was there, he got into an argument with a different inmate from the Croxteth Crew called Ryan Lloyd. Half an hour later, Liam Smith left the prison after visiting hours, went out into the car park, and he was shot dead by the Croxteth Crew. So yeah, that's just a little bit of background on these two gangs, and that was the first and only time up until Rhys's murder that guns had actually been used. So up until then it had just been a one-off and no one really knew that this was going to keep happening. Anyway, 3 days after Rhys Jones' murder, Sean Mercer was arrested and brought into the police station for questioning. And as you can imagine, he was very uncooperative. There were also 2 other teenage boys that were arrested, also members of the Croxteth Crew. These were called Dean Kelly and James Yates, and they were equally just as uncooperative as Sean Mercer.
What you find with Sean Mercer and gang members like him is that they've got no fear of the police. They've been in and out of police stations from a very young age, often from the age of 12, 13, and so they know the system and they know that they can play the system to their advantage.
Police believed that Sean Mercer was the actual gunman. Although they had no evidence, they just had a lot of hearsay, and there's no smoke without fire. And they had a little bit of circumstantial evidence. They thought that the shooter was going to be from the Croxteth Crew, and obviously if everyone's talking about a certain member of the Croxteth Crew, they thought it was him. The other 2, Dean Kelly and James Yates, they thought were involved somehow, like maybe helped him, maybe gave him the gun, something like that, but they thought that Sean Mercer was the one that did it. And so they put Sean Mercer into an identity parade. If you don't know what an identity parade is, it's basically where they get the suspect and a bunch of other people that sort of fit that same description. So not like complete lookalikes, otherwise that'd kind of defeat the whole object of this. But say if the suspect was kind of medium build, male with brown hair, then they'd get a bunch of people fitting that description. So they line up all these people, including the suspect, and they bring in all the witnesses behind a one-way screen to see if they can pick out who they saw on that day. And obviously police know who they think it is, and if the witness picks out that same person, then the police think that they've probably got the right person. Obviously it's not 100% all the time because this was like 4 or 5 days after the actual shooting, and so the full like image of the person in their head, obviously they only saw him for a few seconds, so if they pick out a certain person, they're not going to say, well, that's definitely them. So 5 different witnesses came in and looked at this identity parade with Sean Mercer in it, and not one of them picked out Sean Mercer, which, like I said, it's not always accurate. However, this put a little seed of doubt in police's minds that maybe they possibly didn't have the right person. So all 3 of these boys that had been brought in for questioning had to give a written statement, and just kind of outlining their alibi and just everything that had gone on in that questioning, they just had to kind of write it down. And in Sean Mercer's written statement, he said that he was with his friend Dean Kelly at his house on the day of Rhys's murder. Something that Dean Kelly also said in his alibi. He said that he was with Sean on that day. And the 2 of them hadn't spoken the whole time that they were at the police station. They didn't know that they were both being questioned at the same time. So either it was true and they were together that day and they were both innocent, or they'd formulated this alibi before now. But like I said, they didn't know that they were going to be questioned, so who knows if they formulated an alibi or not. Although police couldn't believe it 100% because they were in the same gang. They were both part of the Croxteth Crew, and gang members will defend each other to the end. It also said in Sean Mercer's written statement that he only owned 2 bikes, both of which were recovered by police and neither of which matched the bike on the CCTV footage. Like, they weren't even the same colour, so it's not even like they could have got the model wrong a little bit. They were just completely different colours. Neither of them were this bike. And his mother, Jeanette Mercer, was also brought in to confirm that he only had 2 bikes, and she confirmed that. She said that they were the only bikes he owned. She'd never seen this other bike on the CCTV footage. So with no evidence to say that Sean Mercer had anything to do with Rhys's murder, he had to be let go. But like I said, his name was circulating around the community as a rumour for a reason, and that was because of some social media posts made by other gang members. Obviously, none of these Facebook statuses or whatever they were, I don't know if they were on Facebook, none of them said names, none of them were incriminating. However, when pieced together with bits of evidence that the police already knew, they could kind of figure out a series of events that happened on that day. On the evening of Rhys's murder on the 22nd of August, members of the Norris Green Strand gang had been hanging around in the Fir Tree pub car park. And the Fir Tree pub was on Croxteth Crew territory. So for members of the Strand gang to be over there on their territory, it was a really bold move for them to make. And this was only made worse by the appearance of a teenage couple. Wayne Brady was a teenager in the Strand gang, and he was especially hated by the Croxteth crew because he was dating a girl called Vicky Smart who was from Croxteth. And the Croxteth crew didn't even like the Strand gang being on their territory, never mind being in a romantic relationship with one of their people. And neither side was happy about this relationship. It got to the point where Vicky was getting threats every single day. Her house got shot at. They shot through the windows of her house, and it got to the point where she actually had to move away from Croxteth. So anyway, on the night of Rhys's murder, Wayne and Vicky were hanging around the Fir Tree pub on Croxteth territory, and obviously the Croxteth crew hated Wayne.
The fact that Wayne Brady had come on to the Croxteth crew's turf would have been seen as an affront to their honour, and it would have been their job to either get him out of Croxteth as quickly as possible, or shoot at him, either kill him or injure him.
By the time the shooter arrived at the Fir Tree pub car park, Wayne and Vicky had actually already gone. However, 2 of Wayne's friends, who were from the Strand gang, were just still there on their bikes, and so they became the target of the shooter. And obviously this was all just speculation that this was the series of events at this point. However, this was confirmed way later on in the story when it actually becomes solved that this was the actual series of events. Meanwhile, outside of the police investigation, Rhys Jones had become a household name all over the UK. The whole nation felt so bad for this innocent 11-year-old boy that had been killed. It especially affected his favourite football team, Everton.
We all here at Everton have families of our own, and we cannot comprehend what you're going through. We appeal to anyone with any information to please contact the police.
On the 25th of August, Rhys's mum and dad, Melanie and Steve, were invited to Goodison Park, which was the official stadium for Everton. And there they joined 40,000 fans and players in a tribute to Rhys. Rhys's dad said that they thought about not attending because it was so fresh after Rhys's murder. It was just a few days after, and they didn't really want to go and be around that many people. However, he said that Rhys would have really wanted to attend that game, and so they decided to do it for him. Instead of having the usual minute silence to remember someone, the whole stadium did a minute applause. So these 40,000 fans and players were all clapping and cheering for a whole minute for Rhys. Meanwhile, still with no evidence that it was actually Sean Mercer that did this, police had to dig a little bit deeper, and so they decided to look at his phone records.
There was 2 calls made to Mercer before the murder of Rhys, and obviously what we would infer from that is that they were calls to say that the intended victim was in the area.
Although this was just a theory, obviously at this point they had no idea who was on the other side of the phone. They had a number but they hadn't tracked it down yet. This was just immediate theory. They didn't know who was on the other side of the phone, they didn't know what had gone on in the call, obviously it hadn't been recorded, so this was just theory. Like I've been saying all the way through this video, gang members have each other's backs. And at this point police believed that the shooter was probably a part of the Croxteth crew. However, if they were, None of their gang members were going to give evidence against them, and so police had to think of another way to try and get information from them because it wasn't going to come easy. Police decided that they were going to bug some of Sean Mercer's close friends' homes, so they were going to put some microphones throughout the house and have them monitored 24/7 to see if any of these boys talked about what happened on that day. And that is exactly what happened. It wasn't blatant, like they were completely saying like incriminating things, but they were saying things like this.
So there's one way that's going to take the blame for the city. And I'm not going to say I'm going to someone for the she's going to sit there and sing with God. What he's doing is dead. No, I'm going to tell him.
The audio of those little recordings, as you heard, was very muffled and very hard to make out. And so a bunch of kind of audio experts were brought in to try and clear up this footage and decipher what they were saying. The experts must have spent hundreds of hours on these tiny little clips, and it was completely worth it because what they heard was incriminating. They heard one of the boy's parents, mother and father, burning his SIM card so that it couldn't be tracked. And even though this seems like it's complete evidence that James had something to do with it, police couldn't do anything with this yet. If they did go and arrest James and then go to court and they showed this evidence in court, it could easily be flipped on the police, and his attorney could easily say, well, how can you prove that that is James talking? And police couldn't prove that. They couldn't prove who was talking, they couldn't prove that they were actually burning a SIM card, even though it was pretty obvious that they were. They couldn't prove that it was a SIM card, it could have been an SD card, it could have been anything. But then, a couple of days later, police found something else out from these home bugs. They found out that Sean Mercer, just a few minutes after Rhys's death, turned up at a friend's house. This friend is protected by law. No one knows his actual name, and he is just known in this case as Boy M. And he was 15 years old, and Sean Mercer cycled straight to his house after Rhys's murder. Boy M previously wasn't known to police at all. He wasn't known to be part of a gang, didn't have a previous criminal record, and so they invited him into the police station for questioning.
Boy M lived with his mum, and I personally dealt with both his mum and his grandmother. I interviewed both of them and took statements from both of them. They were crucial witnesses.
He told police that within half an hour of the shooting, Sean Mercer had arrived at his house and already invited over his whole gang, and they were already there within half an hour. So the first two boys, members of the gang after Sean Mercer to arrive at Boy M's house, were James Yates and Nathan Quinn, followed by the oldest Croxteth crew members, Melvin Coy and Gary Kays, and then the rest of the gang members followed after that. And this could be backed up by Boy M's mother and grandmother who was at his house that day and saw all of these boys enter their house. And so immediately this proves that Sean Mercer and the rest of his gang, every single member of this gang, had lied about where they were on the day of Rhys's murder. Sean Mercer and Dean Kelly had previously said that they were together at Dean's house, which obviously now could be proved wrong by Boy M, his mother and his grandmother. But when Boy M realised what he'd done by saying all this to police, he actually tried to get his mother and his grandmother to change their story. Five weeks after Rhys's murder, and the bugs in these boys' homes, the kind of recording devices, seemed to be not really bringing anything new in. The boys had stopped talking about it. It was old news at this point to them, and so the investigation was really slow at this point. That was until police received an anonymous tip.
So I received intelligence about where the firearm is, caused a search warrant to be executed, and we recovered a World War I revolver, and the other one was a imitation semi-automatic pistol.
These firearms were found in the attic of a boy's house who is also protected by police, known only as Boy X. who also wasn't involved in gangs, hadn't had a police record, wasn't known to police until now.
What did you think he might be guilty of, responsible for at that stage?
We weren't sure exactly. Was he, you know, maybe involved in a larger conspiracy? Was he assisting Sean Mercer, so assisting an offender? Was he the gunman?
So forensics were done on this gun, ballistic experts looked at this gun, but it was found that this type of gun couldn't have made the injuries that were found on Rhys Jones.
So I said to the forensic expert, you go back and you look at everything again, and then you come back and see me next week.
But police believed that it was just far too coincidental for this not to be the murder weapon because of all these lies, all the suspicion, all the kind of circumstantial evidence. They just thought that this had to be the murder weapon. And so the gun was sent off for further testing while police familiarised themselves with Boy X. Police quickly realised in this boy's questioning that he was nothing like the other members of the Croxteth crew. He was very vulnerable, very shy, he seemed almost scared to be there. Not nervous like he had something to do with it, but like a scared little timid child. Whereas all the other members of the Croxteth crew were cocky, they were confident, they acted like they were better than the police, they were a bit rough, like he was a complete contrast to the other boys. Obviously he could have still been part of the gang, just because he didn't share personality traits with them didn't mean that he wasn't part of the gang, or at least friends with them. However, police thought that maybe he didn't really have a voluntary part in Rhys's murder. Meanwhile, the results of the second testing of this gun, the potential murder weapon, came back. And in this second testing, they'd actually used a different type of ammunition. They used a certain type of bullet that was found in Boy X's loft along with the gun. This ammunition that they used the second time that was found with the gun didn't actually fit that type of gun properly, and so that's why they didn't use it the first time. The first time, they assumed that maybe they had the right bullets for the gun and they just used them all. And so that's why they tested it with that type of bullet first. But this time they used the bullets that were found with the gun because even though they didn't fit it properly, after all, these boys were all teenagers, they probably didn't know much about guns. They probably just got some type of bullets, some type of gun and tried to use them as best they could.
What that meant was when those bullets were fired from that gun, instead of travelling in a straight line, rifling as normal, it would immediately start to tumble the bullet. So it would travel this way rather than in a straight line. And once that was test fired into the compound that is used in forensic laboratories, that gave the same injury that was present on Rhys but at the back in Rhys's shoulder.
And after this second testing, the ballistics expert agreed that this probably was the murder weapon. So Boy X was brought in for some more questioning, this time on his involvement in the murder, because obviously he was harbouring the murder weapon. He had something to do with this.
When we interviewed him, it was obvious that because of his background, because he had no criminal record, they targeted him because they knew his house, if we were going to search any, would be the last house we'd look at.
Boy X told police that on the day of Rhys's death, Sean Mercer had texted him an address and just told him to get a taxi there immediately. He was ordered to go to this address and to pick something up. He didn't know what he was picking up. He didn't want to ask too many questions to a member of the Croxteth crew, and he also didn't want to say no for his own safety. And this address that Boy X was given by Sean Mercer was actually the address of Boy M's house, and Boy X and Boy M didn't actually know each other, but Boy M's house was where the whole of the Croxteth crew had gathered within minutes of Rhys's murder. So Boy X got to Boy M's house. This is going to get a little bit confusing. Boy X got to Boy M's house, knocked on the door. Boy M answered the door and just didn't say anything to him. These two boys didn't know each other. He didn't say a word to him. Boy M, whose house it was, just turned round and ran straight up the stairs, so Boy X followed him up because he just assumed that that was what he was supposed to do. When they got upstairs, Boy M, whose house it was, went into one of the bedrooms, and a couple of seconds later, another boy came out of one of the bedrooms. And this boy was holding something in his hand, something all wrapped up, and Boy X assumed that this was what he was supposed to be picking up.
He gave me a bag. I was thinking, what is it? And I was scared to say no. He was in a rush to give it to me. I didn't know it was a gun at first. It was like the size of a piece of A4 paper. It was quite heavy. As I went downstairs, he said, "Don't say nothing to no one."
And it was later revealed that the boy that handed Boy X this package was actually Sean Mercer. So that puts the murder weapon with the main suspect just minutes after the murder, and he's trying to get rid of it. And so all of that together is just so suspicious. And at this point, police are believing that that is enough circumstantial evidence that they could take it to court, and even though they didn't have any kind of forensics to say that it was Sean Mercer, that was enough for them to say that he was guilty. However, police feared that Boy X wouldn't repeat all of this in court out of fear that the Croxteth crew might come and get him. Because obviously, like I've said, gang members have each other's backs, and if you go and tell on one of the members of the gang, the rest of their gang mates are going to come after you. And so police realised that if they wanted Boy X to talk in court, they were going to have to try and get him immunity. Boy X had broken the law by hiding this murder weapon. Whether he knew it was the murder weapon or not, you can decide that because we don't know. And for that, whether he knew he was hiding a murder weapon or not, he could still get prison time for doing that. So in return for him going to court and telling this story and giving evidence against Sean Mercer, he would get immunity so that he wouldn't get charged for hiding the murder weapon. And hopefully that would be incentive enough to make him want to go to court and give this evidence so that he wouldn't get prison time, and also obviously his name was protected so the Croxteth crew couldn't really go after him. Meanwhile, Sean Mercer was out completely free with the rest of his gang because police couldn't arrest and charge them until they could be sure that Boy X could get immunity. Immunity had never actually been granted in the UK before, ever, and even though police believed that this time it would, you can't be sure. So just in case immunity wasn't granted and Boy X wouldn't go to court against Sean Mercer, police had to look for some other evidence to back up why Sean Mercer was the murderer. So if you remember, the bike that the gunman was riding on that day was never actually found, never identified. None of the boys were in possession of it, and police were just still searching for this bike. Until Boy X was questioned again, and this time asked if he knew anything specific about Sean Mercer or the other boys' bikes. He said that earlier that year, Sean Mercer's bike had been stolen, and so he bought a new one. This time it was a specialised hard rock mountain bike. Police established quickly that this bike was very rare. Only 3 of this particular model and colour had been sold in the UK in 2007. One of which was in Croxteth.
So I released a photo of a specialised hard rock mountain bike in the media, and sure enough, a guy is at home and he goes, "That's in my shed."
A passerby had actually seen this bike frame on the side of the road without wheels, and so he assumed that whoever owned the bike had just left it out for scrap since the wheels had been taken off, and so he took the bike frame. So the bike frame was sent off for forensic examination, and sure enough, Sean Mercer's DNA was found on the brake of the bike. And this was just more proof on top of all the other proof that police had that Sean Mercer was the murderer. Meanwhile, Boy X had actually been granted immunity, and so he could also testify in court against him. So 8 months after the murder of Rhys Jones, 14 people, including Sean Mercer, were arrested. Sean Mercer for murdering Rhys Jones, and the rest of them for assisting an offender. Among these 14 people, there was obviously different members of the Croxteth crew, but also some of the boys' parents, including Sean Mercer's mother, Jeanette Mercer, who had lied about how many bikes her son had, and James Yates' mother and father, Francis and Marie Yates, for trying to burn their son's SIM card so that he couldn't be tracked. And it was finally then in court, when the whole thing was pieced together, no more lies, that we found out exactly the series of events and exactly what each member of the Croxteth crew had to do with Rhys's murder. So around 6 p.m. on the 22nd of August 2007, Sean Mercer, who was 16 years old at the time, was called by an older member of the Croxteth crew. 24-year-old Melvin Coy was one of the leading members of the Croxteth crew, and he knew that Sean was desperate to get out of the junior wing of the Croxteth crew to prove himself and to become one of the real Croxteth crew members. So Sean was called to 19-year-old James Yates' girlfriend's home, where James, who was also a member of the Croxteth crew, I don't know if his girlfriend was, but James definitely was, and he gave Sean the murder weapon. At 7:10 that night, Sean got a second call from 24-year-old Gary Case, also a member of the Croxteth crew, to say that there were 2 members of the Strand gang in the Fir Tree pub car park. And he was basically briefed by Gary Case to go to the pub car park and shoot at them. They didn't care whether he killed them or whether he just scared them away, but he was to go and shoot at them. So Mercer cycled to the pub. He was at the other end of the car park to the targets. He shot at them 3 times, missed every single time, but the second bullet hit Rhys Jones. He then, after realising that he'd shot an 11-year-old boy, cycled straight back to Boy M's house, called the rest of the gang over, and there they decided what they were going to do to destroy the evidence. So later that night, after seeing to the gun and the bike, Mercer, Yates and Quinn all got into Melvin Coy's car. Coy worked at an industrial estate where he had access to a lockup, and so they drove 2 miles away to this lockup to try and destroy some evidence. There they burnt all of Sean Mercer's clothes and washed him down in petrol. These boys were very clever. They'd looked into how to get rid of evidence. They were very forensically aware. They'd read up on forensics with guns, they'd looked into previous police cases, spoken to older members of the Croxteth crew, and found out how to get rid of gun residue was to wash yourself with petrol. And like I said, they were very forensically aware, they were very clever, they knew what they were doing, and no gun residue was ever found on Sean Mercer. And it was confirmed that every single one of those boys was in the industrial estate that night because of CCTV footage. All the boys' phone records showed them being there. But when police went to search it, all they found was 3 empty petrol cans. So Sean Mercer and 7 of his gang members were all tried at the same time in the same trial. They were all stood there together and they all pled not guilty to each of their kind of different charges that they were being charged for. But it was their behaviour in the dock that really shocked the public. Obviously, they were only a few feet away from Rhys Jones's parents, the parents of the 11-year-old boy that they'd either murdered or hid evidence of the murderer. And all the way through the trial, all those weeks of the trial, those 8 boys would be stood in the dock, laughing, joking, talking, with Rhys's parents just a few feet away.
The behaviour throughout the trial is despicable. They were shouting to each other, telling jokes, laughing, paper aeroplanes, you name it.
After 3 months of trial, Sean Mercer was found guilty of the murder of 11-year-old Rhys Jones, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years. Gang members found guilty of assisting an offender included James Yates, who got 7 years, Nathan Quinn, who got 2 years, Boy M, who got a 2-year supervision order, and Gary Case and Melvin Coy, both sentenced to 7 years. Dean Kelly was convicted of assisting an offender along with 3 other charges. I don't know what they were. Possibly one of them was perverting the course of justice for his fake alibi. However, he got 3 years. Sean Mercer's mother, Jeanette Mercer, and she was sentenced to 3 years for perverting the course of justice, obviously lying about like what bikes Sean had. Francis and Marie Yates, James Yates' parents, were sentenced to 18 months each for perverting the course of justice by burning his SIM card. 10 months after his actual sentencing, James Yates' sentence was reviewed and increased from 7 years to 12 years because they believed that his sentence was too lenient for his part in this murder. And to this day, Sean Mercer is the only one still in prison for the murder of Rhys Jones. In November of 2009, so he hadn't even been in prison for a full year, Sean Mercer got into trouble for stabbing a fellow inmate. And this fellow inmate just so happened to be Jake Farry, the boy who murdered Jimmy Mizzen, who I spoke about the other day. I'll link that up here if you haven't heard about that. Sorry, that was a huge spoiler, but Sean Mercer had crafted his own knife with a pair of tweezers so that he could stab Jake Farry. They must have been having arguments, they must not have been friends while they were in prison, and so this was another premeditated attack. And to me, that just shows how much of a dangerous person Sean Mercer is. And luckily, he will probably never get out of prison. He's got life in prison with a minimum of 22 years, but he's probably never going to be released because he's shown just how much of a dangerous person he is. And I hope that that is taken into account before he's given possible probation. But yeah, that completes this video. I feel like this was a really, really long one, so thank you for sticking around. And I just want to say thank you for the reception on my kind of shorter cases that I've been uploading recently. I've only uploaded 2, but I was only going to upload 1, but then this video took so much longer than I thought it was gonna. But I hope you enjoyed this case nonetheless. It did take me a very, very long time, so I would appreciate if you left a thumbs up on the video, because it really helps me out with YouTube's crappy algorithm that they've put in place now. I say that they've put in place now, but it's been in place for over a year and it is stressing me out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a thumbs up like I just said, and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me, because I upload true crime videos and makeup videos all the time. I'm starting to do true crime videos more and more frequently because I'm starting to do shorter cases mixed in with the longer cases. As you can see, this case is very, very long, and it does take me a long time to research these cases, film them, edit them, everything like that. So I'm really appreciative of the feedback that I'm getting on my shorter case videos as well, because if you like me uploading shorter ones in between the longer ones, it means that I can get more out for you guys while I'm working on the long ones. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This has been a really dragged out intro. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye. I said intro, I meant outro. It's literally 10 to 2 in the morning. I need to go to bed. I'm still waving. Bye.